All right, so we're going to talk to you a bit about our EMM ecosystem, us representing the Android platform team, and specifically partner engineering within that platform. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about kind of our overarching approach to managing and enabling the EMM ecosystem with all of the stuff that you've heard about, right? Because there's tremendous amount of goodness for them to integrate with and create products for you guys. Just to take very high level, Eugene introduced our team and kind of told you what we do. With regards to EMMs, this is kind of how we frame our mission, right? Help EMMs provide exceptional Android experiences. So we base our activities around how do we make sure that EMMs are providing the best experience, the best product to you guys, the end customers, right? How do we make sure that Android is a best-in-class mobility experience for your users, a best-in-class management experience for your IT admins? So today I'm going to talk to you about kind of the overarching approach that we have to managing that space and making sure that we're providing a nice, consistent, robust experience within the ecosystem across all of our various partners and vendors. So the way we kind of approached building this structure is we wanted to think about what are the things that we want to see in a healthy ecosystem of different vendors providing services on top of our platform. Well, the first one is kind of a no-brainer for us. It's consistent quality, right? We would very much like, we want to have powerful vendors who are capable of executing great APIs and providing robust features to their end users. And we want it to kind of happen in a reasonably consistent way, right? So kind of like if you buy a Samsung device or an LG device, you'd expect an API on that device or maybe a feature to work in kind of a similar way. Like you could get the same sort of things done. We want to some extent our EMMs to be able to have features be somewhat comparable, right? At least with regards to implementing in our framework, because there are certain best practices and implementation details that are unique to Android, and we want to make sure that that's represented across the ecosystem. Okay, so that's kind of the first bit. What else do we want to offer in our ecosystem? Well, there's quite a lot of vendors that offer management around the world, quite a lot even here in this region, right? And so we want to be able to offer some transparency and be able to empower you as the consumer to understand what different vendors will offer and how that will actually look on a device if you go to use it. Trying to be a little more straightforward rather than having to look at giant product spec sheets or kind of these big kind of bake-off processes. We want to provide both an in-depth and high-level view of what you're going to get from an EMM or what Google thinks you're going to get from various EMMs, right? Because we work very closely with these partners to make sure that everything's integrated, everything is working the right way. We'll actually talk about what that process looks like so that you can see the kind of steps we take to make sure that you guys hopefully have a good experience. Last bit is really key. Android's strength is in its diversity, right? That's one of the pillars of our platform, is that we can have a diverse ecosystem of devices, of carriers, of all sorts of different use cases and form factors that can be met by Android. And that certainly applies to our management capabilities, right? We think a lot of the stuff that we built in, starting with Lollipop all the way through all the things you've seen in O, enables a robust set of use cases, an incredible amount of features, and not every single feature is going to be right for you guys, right? For any given customer, not every feature is going to be necessary. There's a lot of different options out there, and we really want to give room for any given vendor to differentiate and distinguish themselves in the space, right? So those are kind of the three pillars of the ecosystem that we want to be able to foster. How will we do this? Three not so simple steps. First off, we publish what we call our EMM requirements. And we'll actually walk you through, and so you can see what those look like and get a sense of how we work with our EMM partners and what kind of basically success criteria we establish to say, yes, you support Android in this way. Next, we do an actual hands-on solution validation. So we sit down with every EMM vendor who says, yes, I've done all the things that you've said. I'm ready to go into production with this product. We actually sit down with them, go through a checklist, see it in person, and do a sanity check and make sure, yes, that API is being used in the way we think it should be used, or we're meeting that feature is actually going to be able to be used by someone in this room, rather than just be a concept or a box on a spec sheet. And then finally, we want to surface all of that information to you guys and publicly, so that anyone can make an informed choice when they're looking at what sort of EMM vendor they want to deploy into their environment. So let's move. Oh, I have the clicker. Never mind. All right, so let's talk about the requirements to start. So you've heard a lot about the different deployment methods we have in Android, all of the different provisioning modes, and the COPE, COBO, that's a new one for me, COMP, COSU, there's acronyms for everything. We wanted to be a little bit more straightforward on the use cases we think we have available in the platform. And we call these solution sets, right? So it's a set of features and capabilities that meet a particular solution. So an example of that is work profile. Work profile is a particular use case. You can use it maybe with corporate owned, maybe with BYOD. It's up to you how you do it. But as far as meeting a specific use case, it's that particular use case's implementation of what we have in Android. Another example is work managed device, right? So we have a set of what we call these solution sets, which are the high-level integration points for our EMM vendors. And EMMs can build to one or more of these solution sets to support Android Enterprise. Solution sets are, of course, built up of individual features, right? So there's a giant list of features, which we'll show you a little bit later, but here's a little snippet of it. The giant list of 70, 80 plus features across all versions of Android and Play that support Android Enterprise that we've actually cataloged and defined. And we've done nice things like put in the Android version, the minimum version that you need. Gerard was talking about how do you know which version to standardize on and what's your minimum version in your environment. Well, hopefully this feature list and understanding what's important for your deployment will give you some level of insight into what version of Android you want to standardize on. We'll come back to that in a little bit. So once we have these features, we break them into the solution sets, right? And we decide what's actually necessary and possible within any given deployment, right? There are technical limitations for solution sets. So for instance, work profile can't manage full device capabilities, right? We've seen how there's the distinction between the work profile and the work managed device and what's possible there. So we've listed out the features and where they can actually operate according to the solution sets that we've defined. And then we group them by type because it's a very long list, and otherwise it'd be very hard to figure it out. All right, so that's kind of the first step we took. Yeah, of course.
So, so just so you guys understand what we mean by when we say features. So features is not just hitting an API, right? Features are a combination of utilizing an API, but in combination with best practices. So in other words, we're very specific about how to use those APIs. And that's because what we initially found when we released all these APIs is that some EMMs would build to them, but they actually didn't work when you got into production. Customers couldn't light these things up. And so coupled with those best practices, we try to make sure that then you get a much better experience.
Yeah. So we'll dig into how those features are constructed in just a sec, but that's a very good point. Okay, so within any given solution set then, there are things that are very important, i.e. you can't run it without it. And then there are things that are value add, right? There are things that probably don't represent min viable product for anyone in this room, but are maybe important to some folks and may not be important to others, right? So within, say, work profile, there are a set of features that we've defined as mandatory features. And these features are things that we say any EMM that wants to support work profile needs to build, okay? Then every other feature that's possible on work profile is now an optional feature. It's an area for an EMM to differentiate and to specialize their product to really hit a certain market or define a certain strategy. But it's not what we think is as min viable in the sense of it's not something that you could live without to deploy a work profile in the most basic sense. Again, that doesn't mean that for any individual customer in the room that it may be min viable for you, right? That's up to you to determine. We'll actually kind of show you how you can use these tools to figure out what's really important in your environment and who actually supports that. All right, so once we have this kind of breakdown, then we go into actually defining the features themselves in specific implementation terms, and that's exactly what Eugene was talking about. So we don't just say, here's an API, go build it, right? For exactly the reason that there's many different ways to implement a single API, and it may not actually speak to the specific use case that the API is intended to address, right? Or it may not be usable in the way that it needs to. We have a tremendous amount of context on the enterprise team, A, because we actually implemented the features, but B, we've been working with the ecosystem, working with EMMs from all sorts of different places, all sorts of different use cases to understand how these are used and can be used so that we can put together best practices to make sure that the tools are actually being leveraged in ways that mean something to you as a customer, right? It's good and all. We got the question earlier about work profile, or the work challenge, right? Is work challenge really going to be terribly useful if you can only assign one challenge to your entire enterprise? Probably not, right? So that's the sort of thing that we, the sort of best practice that we include in our requirements when we see a place that an API needs to have context. And it's not just a requirement, it's the framework for an EMM to understand how to build it. Because in some cases, we introduce new features and we're not always going to every single EMM and saying, this is what this feature does, here's the 16 APIs and how they work together. So the requirements is how we scale that. The last thing, well, okay, so we define these requirements, we make them publicly visible. EMMs go out, they say, I want to build this solution set, which means I have to do these 16 mandatory features. And I also want to have these 4 optional features because they're really important to my customers, and I need to make sure that my customers understand that I support them, that Google says I support them, that they'll do the right things when I deploy them. So they'll build to those requirements, and then they'll schedule a meeting with us. And we will sit down in person, and we will review each step required according to the requirements. We'll make sure that it makes sense, and that it can be deployed, that it actually works. And at the end of it, we'll say, yes, congratulations. You're now validated for that solution set and these optional features. And we're going to publicly demonstrate that fact and stand behind it. We, Google, will stand behind the fact that you, EMM, support these features. And that's really important thing for us, right? Because when Gerard goes out to one of you guys on site and you're trying to do something with your EMM that's not supported by Google, it's very hard for Gerard to know what's actually supposed to be happening with the EMM. This is the way that we can assure our team and everyone engaging in trying to deploy an EMM's architecture that the feature is going to work in a particular way. We have the checks to make sure that the underlying premise will be there, that it will work in the way that we think it will, right? It's the exact same thing that we do with devices. In order to run Android, you have to pass a test. Google has to say, you passed that test. You run Android. You can now run Android, right? Very similar thing that we're trying to do with the EMM ecosystem. Make sure that we're in a position as Google to stand behind and advertise the fact that our EMM support specific features. So just to go give a little demo, next slide. Oh, I got it. Oh, you backed up. Okay, I got it. All right. So just to show you, this is all public today, and we'll run through a little bit. So this is the feature list. If you want to dramatically scroll through it, just to demonstrate just how long it is. I think it's 76. Wow, so many features. 76 all right. Features. So they're grouped by type, right? So like provisioning versus security, management, usability, things like that. You have the name of the feature. You have a minimum Android version, so you can understand if you pick up a feature that you think is really, really important and you absolutely need to have it in your environment, then you know you can't support any devices that are below that. And you'll also see the tick box that indicate that that feature is available for your given solution set. So if you know what solution you want to deploy, you can see what features are available. Or if you don't know, you can figure out what features are important and then, ergo, what solution you're up to deploy. Now, this is just a bunch of text on a page. If you go ahead and click the overview button, you can actually get a little bit more granular understanding of what each one of these features is. So go ahead and scroll down to solution set features and expand out work profile. All right, so now we get a little bit more detail about what these features actually do. You can see the mandatory versus optional features for each one of the categories, and this is just work profile. There's a breakout per solution set. So you can see a brief, hopefully human-readable description of what that feature is supposed to do. And you can understand if you have an EMM that's validated for that solution set, what they will have, i.e. mandatory, and what they may not have, i.e. optional. All right, then go ahead and jump into the work profile page on the side. So this page, if you're really, really keen, this is where you can go to get the most data. But this page is really intended for EMMs to understand what they should be building. And this is where we define, not only you see that description up top, so go ahead and expand one. So you get the title, you get the description in italics there, the min version, and then the specific requirements are listed out. And this is actually the, quote, letter of the law that we use to frame what EMMs should be building to. And then when we sit down for that validation, what we're actually judging them against, what we're sanity checking to make sure that it actually works. So each one of these features is enumerated. It's publicly available. The link will be shared out if you guys are curious. And we'll talk about a little bit how we're surfacing this information. Eugene will go into that, and then kind of a brief call to action so that you can understand how these tools might be used.
Awesome. Can I be clear? Awesome. Okay, cool. So now you know how we get people to build things. And now you know how we get people to build consistent things that we can then support. Before I move on, though, I actually do want to reference back to something that Ian said about validation. So validation, when Ian tells you we sit in a room and we have the EMMs go through things step by step, and we actually confirm that all of these things work, that is absolutely what we do. And we do fail partners, or we tell them we can't pass them for specific solutions, right? So this concept of validation is extremely important, and it'll flow through into what you're about to see. Okay, so how do we show people, right? How do we help people to understand that you know, X EMM supports Y feature? Through something we call a matrix. So, so the EMM matrix. So what happens with the EMM matrix? The EMM matrix, number one, is a public site that you can all go to. We'll give you guys the link to it afterwards to find out which EMM supports exactly what solutions. Okay, all of the validated solutions are actually published to this site, typically 2 or 3 days after an EMM passes validation. Only validated, approved integrations are listed. Partial integrations are given no credit. So if an EMM has a list of 14 mandatory features they have to support for work profile, if they only support 10, they don't show up here. We actually ask them to go back and ensure that the other 4 are also properly supported as well. So a couple of other key bits of information that you'll see on this sheet. Not only is the Android version translated to the sheet, so you know what MIM version you need on the device, but also the EMM's version is on here as well. We found that was actually a pretty critical piece of information because customers were asking us, well, what version do I have to upgrade to get this set of functionality? And so we had to make sure that that was actually in here as well. The other important point here is that a lot of providers will offer cloud and on-prem services, so we actually translate that to this page as well. So in addition to that, not only can you actually go there to see who supports what, but you can actually search against specific features. So let's say there's an optional feature that you're looking to get. Here you can see obviously that we've checked advanced COSU features and package installer app management. Right? And you actually want to know which EMMs support this from a Google perspective. You can come to the page, you can click on the filters, select those items, hit search, and all the EMMs that support those features will be there. They will come up. Okay? Okay, so what about the way that we display EMMs? There are 3 tiers of EMMs. The first one is a partner. Okay, and here you can see Mobile Iron and VMware AirWatch are surfaced here. These vendors are the ones that we actually work very, very closely with to tightly integrate all of their features, right? And you guys will be able to see that when you go through the matrix. They likely have more solutions validated, right, oftentimes. Then you'll see solutions providers. Solutions providers we are a little less tightly ingrained with. There's less go-to-market activity, but that doesn't mean that their solutions aren't also tightly validated once they actually have completed them. So the quality of the solutions are commensurate, sorry. Yeah, that's all, slips there. But when it comes to a partner, we actually coordinate very closely on the go-to-market perspective. And on top of that, there's a lot of go-to-market resources that we put out into the field to support these partners. So I'm gonna talk about that more in a second. And then finally, you'll see a coming soon tier as well. The coming soon tier are all the EMMs that we're working with that we believe will be able to deliver their solutions in a short amount of time or a reasonable amount of time, as opposed to 2 years or a year. So I talked a little bit about go-to-market. I talked a little bit about support. Let me tell you a little bit about how we view validated solutions. So if an EMM does not have a solution that is validated, we actually have a difficult time supporting it. And that's just, natural. It sounds like it's easy, but you'd be surprised when it comes to practice, right? And the EMM is actually trying to deploy into an environment. If they're just missing a couple of things, it can make it very difficult to triage and help the customer. That's another reason why validation is so critical. So oftentimes, if you come to us, whatever partner we're working with or solution provider, oftentimes we'll try to help. But if the solution is not validated, it's very difficult for us to get out there and do it quickly and efficiently. So this is going to come up later as we kind of give you guys your call to action. When you're thinking about the EMMs that you're working with, this is going to be a tool. And knowing that we validate certain solutions, I think is going to be critical as you think about your implementation. Okay, so quickly, here's more demo of the site. Okay, we'll send a link around just so everybody knows, but this is basically what it looks like. And I'm going to select VMware here. Actually, let me choose, first let me start with a solution provider. Actually, let me start from the bottom. Let me show you EMM's coming soon. That's easiest. So as you can see, this is not glamorous. There's a list of EMMs that we're working with here. Now, one name I want to call out here is Microsoft Intune because somebody asked about them earlier. We work actually pretty closely with Intune. They are definitely, there's definitely a close technical collaboration with them. They just have not completed validation yet, but we anticipate that to happen shortly. If we go up a level, then we're talking about solution providers. So we can look at, let's look at SoftBank. And you can see here that SoftBank actually currently supports 2 solutions. And here are all of the features that they support. Most of these are minimum features for that solution. As we go up a level, let's click through here. And you can see same thing here.
Perhaps equally important, you can also see the features they don't support, right? So that's not to say that maybe there isn't some implementation that your EMM has that maybe kind of does the trick, or maybe you can kind of hack it together and make it work around. Again, this is the validated solution, so we think it actually works the way that it should and that it will be usable by you, right? So that's why, for instance, advanced passcode management is not filled in here, right? So who is this, Mobile Iron? AirWatch?
AirWatch.
AirWatch. So AirWatch absolutely has some advanced passcode features, right? We're not here to say that they don't, but we haven't gone through and validated that they have all of the specific bits that we call out in our requirements, And so it's not standardized in the way that we can actually stand behind it. And so if you go to deploy and try and use some of these advanced features, if you run into issues, we might not know what's missing or what's not quite working, which is why we go through this validation process in the first place. We can establish that baseline, make sure that it will meet the requirements of you guys when you go to do it. And we can also know that that feature will work for you because you've looked and you kind of understand the feature and you know which ones are important to you.
Yep. I also might add something to that. So just because a solution doesn't show up here doesn't mean that we're not working tightly with an EMM on that solution, right? There may be something in the field, a requirement for a customer, and the EMM is actively building. We're typically very involved with a lot of EMMs on those efforts to make sure that the quality is there. And sometimes, as we kind of develop these solutions, because we update them every 6 months, we'll introduce new solutions, which maybe don't exist today, right? Maybe there's a class of solutions that we haven't covered, actually. I'm going to tell you, there are classes of solutions that we haven't covered yet that we're building towards, that we actually think some EMMs have a fairly high quality solution there. We just haven't released it yet. It's not the end all be all, but this is a good place to start. I think that's the key message here that we'd like to send.
And you actually bring up a good point, which we didn't really go into. So these requirements are not static. So we update the requirements if the best practices change. We update the requirements if there are new APIs that do things better. It's a living document, and our EMMs are contractually obligated to meet those new requirements within 6 months. That's the agreement. We offer all of these services and the enablement, and we'll help you do it. We'll give you the Play EMM API so you can manage applications. But you gotta stick to our requirements model, and when we make a change, get there within 6 months. So that's how we try and move together as an ecosystem forward to make sure that we're keeping up with new features, we're keeping up with releases, right? As Treble increases velocity for new dessert releases getting in the field, so too we'll continue to make sure that our EMM ecosystem is keeping up and that we're delivering exciting new features to you guys.
Awesome. So what does this mean for you? So there's a set of call to actions here, all right? And as you think about your mobility implementation, your mobility deployment, or if you're thinking about revamping it or redoing it, or you need to, you're reaching an inflection point, we ask that you do a few things with this information. The first one is knowing that there's a set of features out there that you can kind of look at and pick and choose, almost like your menu, right? Review your use case. Understand which features fit into your use case and what you're looking for. Then go to the EMM matrix and check to see where your EMM ranks on those places. And if the EMM actually needs to do some work, let them know. Put in feature requests with them, because oftentimes the customers, you guys, are the ones that move the partners, and we will help you do that, especially when it's an important effort for you. We'll work closely with all the partners involved, and we'll try to make the entire ecosystem successful, because that's what we really, really want to do from an enterprise perspective for Android. The final piece here is there's huge value in these tools because they allow all of us to use the same nomenclature, right? We're not talking two different terms. We're not talking about one type of implementation and someone else uses a different meaning for that exact same set of words, right? This allows us all to be speaking the exact same language. So when we say work profile, you know exactly what we mean. We mean these 14 mandatory features and these potentially 6 additional optional ones, right? And when we say an EMM supports something, it's that specific set of things that we've actually personally viewed and validated. So I think that's where we are. Yep. So I'm going to kind of back up. Do we have questions on the Dory? We don't have Stephen running around and boss us around. Yeah. No, I think we have the Dory. You want to do an in-person question? I think that gentleman right there had a question.
I just have a particular requirement for one of my customers where they need the specific navigation pane down the bottom of Android for a kiosk solution to be not there.
Yeah.
But what are the capabilities, or what's the timeline for turning around something like that? Like if there's a requirement that's outside of scope?
So it depends on the requirement, right? Some requirements require platform. So let's kind of take this in stages, right? Some requirements need platform changes, right? So they need OS level changes from us. Those turnaround times are not short, right? We only do one dessert release a year.
Sure.
Right? There's a second class that comes to us of changes that may hit something like, let's say, a play API, right? Play APIs are actually released at a much greater frequency and cadence than OS changes. So you might see a play change, 60 days, 60, 90 days. So there's that frequency. And then there's a third frequency in which you actually have that EMM that needs to implement the change. Right? And that just either adds time onto what we've deployed, or if it can be done on their own, then it just requires them to do that work.
There's another dynamic to that question, which is actually really interesting, particularly for this conversation. So we think we've done a pretty good job at defining all of the features that we offer in the platform, but there's definitely things that aren't in our feature list, right? There are ways to kind of mix and match things and combine things, or maybe APIs that were typically thought of as consumer APIs that are maybe potentially applicable. So to the point of this being a living document, we're constantly sourcing feedback from the field. And we're taking all of the inputs that we get, whether it's our direct customer engagement, whether it's folks like Gerard feeding back information about what's going on with his engagements, our EMMs, our OEMs, anybody who's got information and feedback about how they actually want to use it and how they want to deploy it, goes into the next version of the requirements that we publish, so that we're creating a schema that's actually meaningful for the people who need to use it, which is you guys, right? Any other questions?
I think there might be questions here. We've lost our show host. 11:16 a.m. Have we answered this one? Do EMM providers have supporting Google account enrollment in their roadmaps? I think we have answered that one.
Start answering.
Yeah, let's just start answering. Go for it. Let's do this one.
Okay. Manual enrollment using this.
Yeah.
Recommended approaches, especially around factory reset protection. Yeah. So this is an interesting one. So for BYOD, we have a pretty good assumption that there will be a personal Google account in the personal profile of the device. So we're not so worried about that. You bring in your own device, you're already using it, you have a Google account. If you are getting a device from your employer and deploying just work profile, then yes, there is that consideration. And so we kind of talked about this in the work profiles on work managed device section, which is that new O feature that's coming out. So there definitely are considerations here. And you need to be careful about what deployment mode you choose and understand the side effects that might come with that and what you're signing up for.
I'll take this next one. So what is the support mechanism if we hit a problem in the deployment of Android enterprise features? So, so we've got a couple of ways of supporting our partners and our customers out there. One is directly through the partner. And that's the one we actually prefer because the partner is actually going to have the best understanding of what your implementation is. Now, if you're a partner and you're asking that question, as some partners ask us, there are two methods that they can escalate to us. Certain partners actually have direct named Google engineers assigned to them that they can escalate through. Yeah, exactly, like Ian. Also, we will be introducing a scaled support request service. Currently, there exists a way for partners to escalate directly into Google support, but this next scaled level will be specifically focused on Android, so we can allow the agents to be even tighter and have better knowledge around these sorts of implementations. So, so it's already, the help desk is already, that takes care of partners, is already 24/7. What we would like to do is make that a tighter scope and focus on specifically these sets of functionalities.
But high level, if you have a problem or a question, go to your management partner. Your EMM is best positioned to help you, and if they need help to help unblock you, then they can come to us, and they have methods.
We'll go bottom and
go right into
bottom
that
up.
one.
How to compare Google MDM solutions with third-party solutions. Doesn't look like G appears in the EMM matrix. That's a good question. Okay, so so whoever saw this is very observant. I don't know if you guys remember earlier, but first when we stepped up on stage, I was very specific about stating that we are partner neutral, right? We try to hold all partners to the same standards. So you as customers and the ecosystem can feel good about the recommendations that we make. Right now, Google MDM does not fit all of the bill, right? It doesn't hit every single item on our feature list. It doesn't mean, as Ian said, that they don't have a perfectly serviceable solution, which we actually think their solution is not bad, but they're missing certain things that we have asked other partners to do. Okay, so we're working very closely with them. We anticipate that will be resolved fairly soon. And just keep your eye on the matrix, and pretty soon they'll show up. There's a set of probably about 3 to 4 things.
Which should hopefully speak to a reasonable amount of impartiality that we try to keep on our platform side, right? Like these are in many cases our teammates, and we're working very closely to make, as we do with any partner who wants to get validated, we work very closely to make sure that they have the opportunity to do that. But we're not going to mislead you guys about the capabilities that any given EMM in the ecosystem has. That's really important to us. We want to make sure that we are accurately conveying and holding everyone to the same standard, so that we can be forthcoming and that you can trust us when you go to the matrix and try and understand what an EMM is.
Okay, let me take this next question. So the reason for the removal of the unlocked device API. So on paper, this API was used for lots of ransomware applications and was inherently insecure. But there's a bigger message here, right? If I understand this correctly, the unlocked device API removal is on the device admin platform. Okay. So one of the things that you will have heard, and hopefully you guys got the message, is that device admin is really, we view it as a legacy mode of management. There are a lot of solutions built on top of it, but we're encouraging the ecosystem and all of our customers to move forward into the Android enterprise world. Right? There are lots of reasons for that. One of them is that we feel device admin is somewhat less secure based on Gerard's presentation. You saw that as well. So one thing you will not see is a lot of additional investment in device admin. In fact, you may continue to see features deprecated from device admin year after year, release after release. So it may become less abuse. From our perspective, this should translate to let's evaluate Android Enterprise with you as soon as possible. If you were thinking about it, why not create a capsule environment so you can experiment with it? Maybe not deploy it to everybody, but at least get a better understanding of how it fits your requirements and how to think about those things. So, so that's the to-the-point message about that, but also a little bit broader. Third one, hierarchy is between Google and MDM partners or solution providers. What about the hierarchy between EMMs and hardware OEMs to ensure the quality of the solution, for example, in some types of devices after enrollment full call? That's a good question. Do you want to take it?
Sure, yeah. So we think that we're very well positioned to kind of be the broker between each one of the ecosystem components to make sure that we're aligning, right? So take example, I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with app wrapping, right? So in order to get app wrapping working on Android, you had to have the person who made the application and then the person who's making the SDK, and they would go have this like kind of side deal and wrap the application and make sure everything worked, and then you'd stick it on Android and hope for the best, right? So we actually think the platform itself is best positioned to enable each one of these partners individually so that you don't have to go have that side conversation and that side deal, right? So just in the way that we're working to validate EMMs, we're kind of now picking up, obviously we have an incredible scale in the way that we validate OEMs for Android as a platform just generically for consumers. But we want to be able to extend that and make kind of a similar sort of process for just like an enterprise grade or an enterprise specification of things that we think are very important maybe kind of different variants or levels of the certain features that are important to you guys when you get an OEM device. So yes, there is some diversity in the experience, like as a specific instance was called out in this question. But we think that we're best positioned to broker that relationship and make sure that each partner vertical is doing the right thing at scale, so that when you as the customer put them all together, it just kind of works. You don't have to get everybody around the table to figure it out.
I would also add that this is not limited to EMMs and OEMs. Right? We try to think of the solutions holistically. So if you think about all of the interops between the partners that are out there, VPN partners, right, connectivity, all that type of jazz, those are things we think about as well. Right? Now it takes time for us to get through a lot of that sometimes because it's a huge ecosystem, but it's something that we're willing to take feedback on. And if you guys feel like there's specific vendors that you'd like us to look at, please escalate that through Gerard. All right, so
next one's about untrusted sources for enrollment. So I think in this case, the answer is if you're using a validated EMM solution, in no way, shape, or form will you ever have to take unknown sources. In fact, it will be explicitly disabled within the work context, whether that's work profile or work managed device, by default. So if you are ticking untrusted sources, chances are you're probably not doing Android Enterprise. And we'd highly recommend that you, or encourage you to reconsider. Speak to Gerard afterwards.
Okay, so if an EMM vendor does not comply or did not pass requirement validation, what would happen? Would Google publish a list of compliant EMM vendors and what features are sufficiently usable and which features are not sufficiently usable? So I'm hopeful that we addressed this question a little earlier with the matrix itself. If we didn't, the person can feel free to rephrase the question. Nelson? Did you?
Great question.
Good question, yeah.
So the requirements were published almost 18 months ago. We've been validating solutions ever since. We just did a pretty major refactor to go into this kind of feature granularity. So it used to be like just solution set, and it was all or nothing, and kind of the optional features didn't really exist. But we've been doing this for quite a while now, so we feel pretty confident in the process. That said, so I had mentioned that 6-month refresh. We update the requirements, and everybody has 6 months to get there. So we actually just had a 6-month refresh. And our list of validated EMMs was actually pruned a bit because we had a few EMMs that were previously validated that didn't quite get across the line within 6 months. So we've removed their listing on the directory. They're working towards it. And we're continuing to support them and make sure that they get there. But yeah, I mean, we're going to be very upfront and tell you, they didn't make it in time. This is the line.
Now, for you customers out there that are kind of in your minds going, well, if I choose an EMM, what happens if you lose validations? Does that mean Google doesn't support them anymore? That's actually not the case. We try to be extremely careful with the mandatory requirements. So the mandatory requirements are the ones that an EMM actually has to validate against. So if you select an EMM and they've been validated on all the mandatories, you can probably be pretty sure that unless there's some major, negligence that happens afterwards, we'll work closely to keep that EMM on the list to ensure that they actually continue to be successful within the program. So can you recommend devices corporate should consider for Kobo or Kosu and Corp owned employee enabled? We can't make recommendations at this point in time. However, that being said, there will be an asset similar to the EMM matrix that talks a little bit more about which devices support this infrastructure, which is obviously a lot of them, which devices support Android for Enterprise, Android Enterprise. That should be coming out soon. So keep an eye out, keep talking to Gerard about it, and he'll make sure to get that link to you when it's published.
I think something to add to that is, I think we think about 12 months ago when I first started this role, that choice is a lot more difficult because there were limited devices out there. So I certainly think the bar has been raised, certainly through what we've been doing with Android M, for example, and saying there's no choice. If you've got a device and you want CTS compliance, you've got to have work profile. So now, there's very few devices you'd be buying today through your typical channels that are a flagship device that aren't running 6 already, right? So as a result, I'd say start with 6, right? That's your minimum. After that, it's like your other requirements, like do I need IP67? Do I need a rechargeable battery? Do I need RFID? Do I need accessories from cases and this sort of stuff? Do I need a bit of price point? Do I need it to be available in certain countries? Right? These are the things that you start to sort of narrow down on. But from our point of view, the great thing is we've got a really high bar that we've set and everyone's jumped over it. Right? So it does make your choice much easier. There's pretty much not many devices that don't have that. In fact, when you're planning these deployments, set your bar at that as well so that you say, even if I've got legacy devices in my environment, maybe just don't touch them. They ain't broke, don't fix it. Just leave them as they are. Start your deployment with this on the newer devices, because one of the challenges you'll get, and I'm hoping that Ben who from Coates High gets up here a bit later this afternoon will point out, is if you set your bar down here, then you can implement features that suit the lowest common denominator, which means your more capable devices don't get to use all the cool features they can use because you've let the bar down here. Right? So maybe you want to consider segmenting your environment to say, these are the devices that support all the latest features. I'm going to manage them this way because I'm going to get the best of the best. These over here, I'm going to segment and do it differently because they're devices I'm going to eventually retire. They're using legacy mode, or they don't support all the really mandatory features I want in my Android enterprise. But I've got a roadmap to move towards that.
That's actually a really good point. Sometimes we meet with customers and we find that they're managing to, like you said, the lowest common denominator. And they do that, obviously, I mean, it's totally understandable, right? You've got a fleet out there. Your fleet is maybe Android 4 or 5. It doesn't necessarily support everything you're looking for. But what it does do is those older devices will hold those customers hostage, right? And so until we can help the ecosystem, all of our customers start thinking about, well, how do we make that transition? How do we get it started, right? Until we can have that conversation with you guys, I think it will continue to be a challenge in terms of keeping you back, right? So that's something to think about. Just one more point, Nelson. I almost forgot to say this, but although we've been working on the requirements program for 18 months, the Matrix launched, I think, 45 days ago. 4 or 5 weeks ago. So the visibility of the Matrix at the level it's at, right? We used to never display the feature sets. We would only say they support work profile, and everyone would say, well, what does that mean, right?
It's actually public.
Yes, it's public. Absolutely. You can
Urge
go look at it today and see if you're on a compliant set of infrastructure. And also, like I said before, if you find that a provider does not have the solution compliant, please go to them and tell them about that. And it's probably, I'd be willing to bet we'll hear about it right after you guys go speak to them. So. And
this is the thing, right? Like until we get the use cases, it's a resource cost investment, right? They're not going to invest in this stuff. And there's enough customers saying, I need this. So come to us, give us your use case, tell us how many devices this is holding up, go back to your EMM provider, tell them, or your solution provider, your ISV, whoever it is that needs to develop these features, your OEM, whoever it is, feed it back to them. But tell us as well, because then we can raise that. We have, as Eugene mentioned, we've got people across different parts of our ecosystem that are named account managers for those different ecosystem vendors. We can go back there and say, hey, this OEM is not doing 30-day updates. This EMM is not doing work challenge, this whatever it is. And the more use case they get, the more devices out there they're missing out on, the better that is, and the more pressure we can put on to get these things to market quicker.
Contrary to popular belief, we do not run EMM's roadmap. So anything you can do to help provide that context, exactly like these guys are saying, is super important. We just want to provide the framework to broker that conversation. So you can say, I actually know the thing that I need because I saw the feature. Like, I understand what that means. So could you please add this in some sort of time? And we'll help them build it.
That's a really interesting point as well, because before this matrix, I myself found, where is that definitive list of all the things we can do, let alone is it possible with today's tools? So we've now got the definitive guide of everything you can do on the platform, right? That's great, because then you know what to ask for, right? Then it's narrowing down who can actually do it, and if they can't, saying to them, well, perhaps you should, right? So at least we've given you the tools to allow you to get to that conversation.